Kia ora koutou, ko Robin Tukuingua. I'm from Trees That Count, and with me here is an amazing group of talented and passionate young rangatahi from across the country. We've got someone from Ōtepoti, someone from Waiuku in the north, so we really have got the breadth of the country here. We asked them to come along today to share their knowledge and their expertise with us all, to share their perspectives as young people today, knowing that we face a climate and biodiversity crisis, and that unfortunately that will play a large part in their lives to come. They're all at varying stages in their journeys, but they're all actively working in or supporting restoration and regeneration of our whenua. They're all aligned in their passion and their dedication, their commitment and their vision for the future of our native forests. At Trees That Count, we used to have this the strategic objective. It was called Inspiring the Young. And we had a light bulb moment one day, some years ago, and we're like, actually, the young are already inspired. But we realised that instead of being inspired, they need to be enabled and supported. They need to have a place in this environment. They need to be able to get involved, to be heard, to be able to have their voice heard. And they, in fact, will end up inspiring all of us for generations to come. As well as these young people here today, we have about 33 schools, high schools around the country that are joining us online to listen to these young leaders who are already starting to shape the future of our ngāhere already. So a warm welcome to them all. And before I go on for too long, this is a Rangatahi panel, and I don't make that category any longer, I'm afraid, so I will let them speak. They're going to introduce themselves, but I think before they get started, they just wanted to ask a few questions of the audience. So I'll hand over to the team.
Cool. All right, the first partai that we have for all of you in the room, I'd like you to please stand up if you're under 30 years of age. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh! It's kind of a ripple effect, I think, across the room. Okay, thank you. You can all please sit back down.
So the second question that we have for you today is stand up if you directly engage young people in the spaces that you're working in. Great, so there's quite a few of you standing, but we've got a further question for you, so if everyone can sit down.
Last one.
Kia ora. Stand up if you would like to engage more young people in the space you're working.
Is there anyone sitting for your survey? It's a few people.
It's very bright.
A few people sitting down. Hopefully by the end of this we can convince you that it's the right thing to do.
It's like some drinking game, isn't it? So I'll now let you guys all introduce yourselves, starting with you, Natalia. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start. Well, yeah, hi, I'm Natalia, and I come from, southwest of Auckland, up in Waiuku. And from my area school that I go to, none of my family plant trees, none of my friends plant trees. But then, I go to school and I plant trees, and I'm given good opportunities to go. And now I want to see if I can talk to my auntie about planting on her land. And it's just an awesome opportunity to just be invited to even come down here and be among all these kind of planting people and companies and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Natalia.
So, kia ora. My name's Hale. I'm from the Mighty Waikato, born and raised. I am studying at the university there, and I work with Trees for Survival, and so we are directly engaging with primary schools through high schools, planting and growing trees, which is just awesome. And Natalia is actually at a school that is part of the program, so that's pretty cool.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Rhiannon Mackie. I work engaging young people in environmental policy and climate change spaces, both here in Aotearoa and internationally. I'm involved with the Children and Youth Major Group of the United Nations Environmental Programme. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making sure that youth voices are heard, especially when it comes to policies around the triple planetary crisis we're facing, which is biodiversity loss, climate change and pollution. So being here today, I'm speaking from my experience engaging young people, particularly in these kind of spaces, where we're looking at a cross-disciplinary approach when it comes to restoring our environment.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Sophie Hanford tōku ingoa no Paikakiriki ahau. My name's Sophie, I'm from Paikakiriki on the Kapiti Coast, and I'm a Kapiti Coast District Councillor, was the youngest elected member back in 2019 and hold the climate and youth portfolios around our council tepu. I also helped to found and coordinate the School Strike for Climate movement in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so as Rhiannon, extremely passionate about those kind of intersections between the various crises that are just fundamental to us addressing in our lifetime within this quite literal golden window of time that we do have and that we're privileged to be alive in. I'm also a youth delegate as a part of APEC Voices of the Future, so the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and I'm serving as an advisor to this year's youth delegation who's heading over to Thailand in a couple of weeks' time. So it's a bit about me.
Kia ora koutou, nā me nui kia koutou, ko Ramaroa toko maunga, ko Whiranaki toko awa, ko Ngāpui toko iwi, no Otipoti ahau, no ko Taylor ahau. So kia ora koutou, kia ora to the schools watching. My name's Taylor, I'm an environmental educator. I really love plants. I really love all of our native forests and our wildlife, but I suppose I'm most passionate about connecting people with those spaces, particularly ensuring that our youth are engaging with those spaces and are facilitated to engage. And yeah, just really love trees, so great to be here.
Ko rangi nui e tui honei, ko paputu anuku e takoto nei, kia ora kōrua. Ka rere taku mihi ki te mata o te wā, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou. Ka uri taku mihi ki te mana whenua o te rohe nei, ara ko te atiawa, nā te raukawa me nā titoa rangatira, hiri tēnei no awanui ārangi e mihi ana ki a rātou. Ko wai tēnei e kōrero ake nei, e ki ana te kōrero whatitiri ki te rangi, te arawa ki te whenua, hiri tēnei no te puku o te ika, ara ko mātātua tainui harauta te arawa, nā waka. Ko Mikaere tōku ingoa, ko taku kai timo he kaimahi au i MPI, ara ko te manatu ahu mātua, engari ko taku tino kai ko ngā taonga puoro me ngā rākau rangatira. Hello, my name's Mikaere. I work at MPI in fisheries, disclaimer, but my passion and why I'm here is our taonga puoro and the revitalisation of them and allowing our rākau to sing. But me mihi ka tika ki a koutou, kua tai mai, kia whakarongo ki a mātou, aha koa he iti, aha koa he tipu noa iho, a tōna wā ka tipu mātou ki ngā rākau o tēnā here ne. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.
Thanks, everybody. That was fantastic. First question then. So, who do you think should be responsible for our native forests? Anyone can go.
I think this is a really interesting part, and I think in the past it's been handled as a bit of a blame game. But I don't think it should be a thing where we're pointing fingers and we're trying to accuse people that they haven't done their job or they haven't done their job, because it's not about that. And I think I approach it from a lens where the ngāhere is responsible for itself, but we're responsible for interacting with it and sustaining it. That's sort of how I see the space. So for me, and in the space of taonga puoro and from a Māori lens, I think I play my part in ensuring that the rākau is there not just for me and for my interactions, but for my uri's uri. And the hope is that when I'm gone and when my grandkids are gone, the rākau is still there. So in that space, I have a responsibility to play, but that is not my forest. The forest is the forest, and I'm just there to do my best to keep it around for as long as possible.
Perhaps it's thinking about like not who's responsible, but like who has responsibilities. Yeah. And I think that that's a really key thing. And I think we all have responsibilities, but they vary differently depending on our part to play in that forest, and like, you know, our role to play is as diverse as the ngāhere is itself. And I suppose it's about making sure that we're fulfilling our obligations, but also, you know, filling up to our potential. And I feel at the moment, you know, in some spaces, there's more that we can do, and yeah, and it's up to everyone to find how they're going to contribute and make sure they are.
So cool that I think with responsibility comes massive opportunity. For example, with the responsibility that we have to tackle the climate crisis, to restore and enhance biodiversity, comes huge opportunities through our action to get to those spaces, to get to that kind of vision of a future that hopefully we can all be relatively united upon, that then can have so many co-benefits. So I would say, yep, we all have responsibilities, and that also means that we all have massive opportunities to step into to keep continuing the mahi that's being done, and to actually challenge ourselves through what are some pretty kind of tough kōrero about how we do move forward. Because if we can kind of get united on what that kind of common ground looks like, I think we can kind of better figure out where all our different responsibilities sit within that kind of ecosystem of action.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, as has been said, our forests don't belong to us. We are a part of a wider environment that includes those forests, and so we're not responsible for the forest. We're responsible, as has been said, for ensuring that our interactions with them are done with, you know, intent to sustain those interactions long term, beyond our generations, beyond the generations that come. And I think when we interact with these spaces to a greater extent, we have a greater responsibility to make sure that those interactions are sustainable. When we are, you know, we have an obligation to ensure that we are making sure that these interactions can continue long term, but in a way that is not relying on future generations to restore what we have damaged and destroyed.
Yeah, so I think definitely, like, we don't own the forests are their own, and they're living and they're productive, you know, they're dynamic systems. But I think a lot of our problems we know that they've come from human activity, our introduced predators, our clearing of forests and stuff. So we have that responsibility to fix those things where we can, you know, because these problems come from us. So it's our responsibility to try and be a part of healing the forest.
And like, while I agree with that, and everyone has their own individual and like need to take care of the forest and you do your part, a lot of the terminology I've seen thrown around in this conference is like expenses, funding, cost and stuff like that. So from more of a societal lens, more of, it's just like central government has a big responsibility because they're the ones that, you know, can fund hunters to come in to help regulate browsing animals or fund traps or do preserve land. They're the ones that can pass legislations or, yeah, like say you can't come in here or we'll put traps here. So I think, yes, individuals need to interact with the forest and help heal, but a lot of it also lies with society and the central government.
Equitable approach where us as individuals can do our part, and maybe you can plant 100 trees a day and that's main, and you can educate however many kids at Orokonui. But if you've got $1 billion corporation sitting on $1 billion, they can do so much with that. So those responsibilities can go way beyond what me as an individual can do. So we do all have our own responsibilities, but not everyone's equal in that space. So it's hoping that people will sort of look at what tools they have at their disposal and how they can use that to enact those responsibilities they have.
Coming into a space like this, as a young person where we have relatively little power in this room, one of the things that has become, you know, really clear is that a lot of the people here have power beyond what we can do as individuals or as, you know, youth as a generation. So really sitting with, you know, what is your power in this space? What does that mean that your obligation to our forests looks like? It's as has been said, this idea of, you know, a differentiated response of those who have more power having an obligation to do more, because those with less power or those with no power, like our future generations who cannot engage in these spaces at all, are relying on you to use that power.
Yeah, we can be the ones that grow the demand for these things. Like, we can teach our kids, and we can, you know, like, we can grow the demand for more funding for these projects because they're so important, and when we're learning that more and more, and it's becoming more of a big thing, so we can just keep growing that and make it easier for us to be able to take those actions.
So you mentioned before about you know, that big corporations can make billions of dollars of profit, and they can do something with that profit. And we've talked a little bit in government and things like that. So what do you think the roles are of government, like central government, local government, everyday New Zealanders, small and medium businesses, like each and every one of us? Like, there's lots of different people in that room, but what do you think each and every one of those groups could do? We could start maybe with central government as the first one.
Am I wearing my MPI hat? I think me mihi ka tika tuatahi ki tōku tuakana ara a te kāpunga, mo tō kōrero inanahi, te mūtunga kia mau te ātāhua. Listening to Te Kāpunga's kōrero yesterday, that really resonated with me, sitting in the government space and seeing the other side of the table. He said, we do not need government. And that's what I see, where, like, a lot of the time, central government wants their fingers in everything and wants to be the ones who are doing the strategies and putting the pūtea on the table, and that's beautiful and that's awesome. But sometimes we as central government have to get out of the way and have to give the opportunity. That's not to say not giving the resource, but there is a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And as Sophie said, kia ora. And as Sophie said before, now is the golden opportunity. And if we need 10 people to sign off on a piece of paper, to then sign off on 10 more pieces of paper, and the first person's on leave, the second person's got COVID, te mea, we don't have time. So as much as central government exists to support and provide both resource and capability, there is also a time and a place where you just got to move aside and let it happen.
Stuff that landowners and farmers have to jump through to try and just restore on their land is making, I guess, them less incentivized to do so, because there's cost to that, and maybe they just want to get out there and they don't want to have to read all those documents and everything, and I think we should make that easier for them to be able to do so.
Finding different ways to factor in the cost of inaction, like, for sure the cost of taking the action that's required, whether it's, you know, through sequestration in terms of a kind of response to our climate crisis, whether it's through ensuring that we're investing in things that will enhance our biodiversity. I think the cost of inaction is a vital part of this kōrero, and also then too in factoring in the co-benefits that we get from the kinds of investments that we're making, because yes, they are investments, they're intergenerational, they're delivering for our next generations. And the other thing that I think we have to kind of factor in is that we very much rely on trees to keep us alive. Like, we have to coexist. We don't actually have a choice. It's about human survival too. And we rely on the whenua being managed and maintained well. And that also, to me, looks like land back. It looks like sovereignty, tino rangatiratanga. It looks like breaking down those silos, as has been mentioned, so that we don't have to jump through so many hoops and we can just get cracking with that action. And I think too, if we were truly factoring in the cost of inaction, then we would be doing all those things, but I don't think that's happening. I think in terms of a council perspective, providing the right framework for urban ngahere, I think as our kind of towns and cities continue to grow and we kind of look to intensification as a solution to the housing crisis, and intensification around transport nodes, which, you know, awesome, because we need to provide those systems for people to get around in low carbon ways. But I think if we're not designing our towns and our centres with green space, with ngahere, so people can grow that connection to the rākau close to their homes, then I think we're doing something seriously wrong. So providing the right framework for that to happen. And also recognising the connection to the 4 well-beings which are in the Local Government Act. And so local government and also central government have a responsibility to environmental, social, economic and cultural well-being. What does that mean to us? How are we actually putting that into practice and not just seeing it as some fluffy concept, but actually how is it translating into policy settings, into action, because action is what's required. Yeah.
And also, just jumping on what's been said already around central government kind of moving out of the way, we're looking at multiple environmental crises that have been caused by systems like capitalism and colonialism. And we can't address those crises through these same systems. So we need to be looking at systemic level changes to ensure that, we're giving land back, we're ensuring that, we're using practices that are designed to enhance movement in the opposite direction of these kind of global systems. And I think central government in particular is designed for people who benefit from those systems. So as much as it may cause discomfort, it's important to acknowledge that these systems, central government isn't the place where we should be going, this is who sets the rules, this is who mandates what we do, because that is moving alongside systems of capitalism and colonisation, and isn't beneficial for the meaningful change that we need. We need to be giving back land, we need to be ensuring that Māori have sovereignty over what's done in their land, and I think really important to acknowledge that potentially these aren't the places that need to be leading the charge, but more providing the resources for others to do so.
What about big business and small business, actually? We touched on it before, but in my role, I can be there at a big business and I can be talking to the head of sustainability and they can be very much interested in funding native trees being planted and things. And then I'll go talk to the CFO and they're like, oh, no, we don't have the money for that, it's too expensive. What would you say if you were in that room alongside me to those big businesses?
It comes down to ensuring, we've had a lot of kōrero at this hui about carbon credits, biodiversity credits, which are I understand their incentives in terms of landowners, but they're also incentives in terms of business to not do anything productive because they can buy their way out of, polluting and damaging the environment. So, it's cool to create those systems to facilitate regeneration, to facilitate awesome mahi that's happening on people's land, but if we are then creating systems where businesses can just buy their way out of polluting, buy their way out of destroying the climate, then are those systems actually causing any benefit? So I suppose it's making sure that we're facilitating those businesses wherever they are to make positive change at place. So if they're operating in a location that they're facilitating that area to be better. So whether it's, and then that comes from not just giving money to an organisation to plant trees down at the local school, but actually being present, being engaged, and ensuring that they're not offsetting, but also addressing the causes of those concerns that they would have to offset otherwise.
Factoring in costs, are they factoring in long-term costs to our environment, long-term costs to the well-being of our people, loss of, culture, loss of land? Are they factoring in all of these other aspects that are being caused, by their actions or by the actions of the systems that they're profiting from? And how are they addressing those as well?
I always find it quite inspiring when sponsors of our Trees for Survival schools actually do attend our planting days and they get involved and they help out, and you can see that they're like, wow, this sponsorship that we're giving is really making a difference, and that they actually do want to be there. So there's a positive,
And I also think it's with really big businesses, I'm just going to take a stab at for example, Coca-Cola. It's how much money is enough money, it's everywhere. We had Coca-Cola in at the dinner last night. It was one of the free drinks you could buy. It's think of how much they sell, and yet they still why couldn't they invest in, for example, using like water power to make their big plastic bottles? Like, why would they keep pumping up carbon into there if they have enough money to just change that, you know?
Why is it so hard?
Yeah, like, it's money.
I completely tōsoko that, and it can sometimes feel like it's just all the right thing to do, so why is no one doing it? And why are we kind of taking so long talking around the real issues when actually what we need is to not continue kind of justifying business as usual by seeing trees as only something that'll be a solution to the climate crisis, when actually we need to see them as living systems that play a role in that way, and play many other roles, as we've mentioned in kind of our coexistence, but also seeing them as systems kind of in their own right, and what that means for the longevity of us, but also the longevity of the whenua. And I think that's where mātauranga Māori comes in too, because the ability to kind of look intergenerationally is something that we don't do particularly well, especially within kind of organisations like council, within central government, very, very short-term cycles of everything. Our long-term planning cycle is only kind of a 20-year, it counts for a 20-year period. That is not a long-term plan. The whenua will live on for many years than that, and so it's about thinking, where do we want to get to? How do we get there? How do we again figure out what role different people and different kind of groups and those within our communities play, and how does that all fit together? Because I think there's space for all of the action that we each want to take in this room, and although kind of at points, and I kind of heard this yesterday when I was watching online, some of them kind of appeared to be contradictory, but I think we actually all want the same outcome. So I think it's again kind of grounding ourselves back into that and recognising the importance of just trying to crack on with it and trying to account for the ways in which everyone does want to ensure the well-being of us as a peoples, but also of the whenua, of the environment.
Natalia?
Yeah, I think another reason that things don't get done is just because it's uncomfortable to change stuff we take such for granted. Like, for example, everyone's timber and local timber. It's like, yes, but after this conference, you're going to drive home in your car and you're going to sign papers made from paper that's exported from overseas using boats that use coal to go. It's just and that's also why I think short-term things are done so much. It's like, why would I bother prepare for something that'll go into effect for 100 years when I could just do it now and get the benefit from that in 10? That kind of thinking.
And it's about welcoming that discomfort as well. Welcoming the fact that we're going to have to make these really tough changes and doing it anyway. And that's a really difficult thing to do when we're only looking at such a short period of time. As you've said, local councils looking at 20 years, that's not enough time to factor in the long-term benefits for people, for the planet. And so it is about having to welcome that discomfort and welcome that change despite the difficulties that it may bring short-term.
Yeah, and when we look at our forests with a holistic approach of all the benefits that they give us, there's just so many, why would you not want to, plant more trees? Water quality, soil health, all these things, we can have our focuses. Maybe as farmers, we want to, increase our productivity, prevent erosion, and then other people want to increase the biodiversity, but really they're all the same solution. So let's bring that together and have this holistic approach to it,
Absolutely. So what does an Aotearoa with a thriving native forest look like?
I think a big part for me is when we look at conservation, there's a bit of a whakaaro that places are protected and places are kept aside so we can all go and look at them, and that's beautiful. But I'm really big in the holistic sort of style of access, and especially through our arts, we can embody our culture. And with the rampant urban disconnect, with the loss of the reo and everything that has happened, our arts are such a tangible example of Māoritanga, and that's the same wherever you go across different whenua. So for me, I think it looks like a place where the ngāhere is alive, it is protected, but it is not locked up. And so if you're a weaver and you want a kākahu for your iwi, you can use kereru feathers, you can use kiwi feathers, because our weavers now have to go to $2 shops and buy feather dusters to get the chicken feathers to work with. And that's such a tohu of the complete loss of culture. So for me, it is a space where we can interact with while still protect our forests and take what we need when we need it, instead of just being like, oh, well, I need some tuatara, so I'll buzz the entire tree down.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. In terms of, like, I think if we ask that question generally, most of us would give an ecological answer. We would say, oh, it's returning this community to pre-1800 levels or whatever, or pre-Māori settlement or something, would give a restoration answer. But I think to kind of tautoko your point, I think it is a social answer. I think it's when our children can go out wherever they are across the motu, if they can access a forest, and I don't mean necessarily like, one type of forest, if they can access a locally relevant, ecologically, robust forest close to them, and where all the children of Aotearoa can go there and they know what different rākau are, they can see a tui, because at the moment, we're doing a lot of mahi everywhere across Aotearoa to save these animals like kakapo and whatever, but like at the end of the day, I know that there's kids in communities in Dunedin and South Dunedin that don't know what a tui is. So like, when we're thinking about what does an Aotearoa with thriving forests look like, it's that those forests are thriving, but everywhere, in places that people have access to them, that people can engage with them in meaningful ways, and that they're providing all of those things that we need for us, but also we're providing all the things they need for them.
And that's the diversity is reflected as well. A lot has been said in this conference about tōtara is the rākau, and it is beautiful, and especially in the whakairo space, tōtara is a beautiful rākau, but it's not. There's more to the world than tōtara. And back in the rā, there were different patches of ngāhere which reflected the different ecological states, and that is what I would like to see. We're just banging in Pohutukawa and Kauri, just sort of wherever, because those are the ones that people know, which is beautiful. But then as a Pohutukawa starts to grow, the roots go absolutely everywhere, and when they're straight through the middle of a highway and people wonder why their highway is getting messed up, it's because we've lost that connection and we've lost the mātauranga associated with, well, back this used to be a swamp. So when we think about what's in a swamp, why don't we plant those instead? And bringing the mana back to the rākau, which people don't really know about. Because everyone knows kauri, everyone knows tōtara. You get a bit niche with rimu and kahikatea and then anything below that. So it's your point again of that connection and where it should be instead of where we think it should be, because that's the pretty one.
Small scale, like when you're planting a gully, having those ones in the wet patches that are meant to be there, because that's how they would occur naturally, like.
Given what you've all just sort of described about what a thriving Aotearoa looks like, do you think this vision for our forests has Te Tiriti at the centre?
There is a future or a vision for our native forests that we can give you that doesn't have Te Tiriti at the centre of it. I think as a generation, or at least as a panel of young people, we are moving towards a future where there isn't another option. And I think, I speak for all of us when we say that that's our perspective.
Yeah, just straight reflecting what Mikaere said before, like, we locked up a third of this country's land in conservation land, and, by that logic, that should be pristine, shouldn't it? But if we go there, it's not. And it's because we've lost that connection to that place. It's because it's not, we're no longer part of that landscape. We visit it, we're transient through it, but we're no longer part of that landscape. And I think if we really want to engage meaningfully with a future of thriving forests in Aotearoa, we have to think about the Te Ao Māori perspective in that space.
100%. And not only kind of considering the perspective and what it means for the way that we view the role of our forests and how they operate and where they are and what trees are planted where and how land is kind of planned for and then utilised. I think also it's vital that the process through which we go on that journey together has that real sense of partnership, because otherwise we risk kind of going too far or getting to a certain place where actually the mahi isn't meaningful and it's not going to deliver those solutions that are desperately needed. And if we do the work at the beginning to build and strengthen those relationships, then there's so much potential within that, I think. And sometimes I feel like we can really discount that as an important step, but I think it has to be crucial if our solutions and what we put in the ground and where we put it is actually meaningfully going to live on into the future and be respectful of what does need to be at the centre, which is Te Tiriti, and the partnership that this country is founded upon, or that should continue to be alive in every single space that we're in. But again, I think we're ready to kind of write a new future that looks a little bit different maybe as to how things have been done in the past. And I think that's something that we all kind of have to prepare ourselves for and really get on board with. So
I think the Te Tiriti space is a really interesting one because it is the founding document, but for us in Te Arawa, we never signed it. And if I put my tūoi hat on, we weren't even asked to sign it because one of the rangatira said trespassers will be eaten. And that's another kōrero, but I think Taylor really hit the nail on the head where it was that switch from what is a Te Tiriti, where's Te Tiriti, and Taylor goes, well, in Te Ao Māori, and I think that's where it is. And as we talked about before, the diversity of the ngahere, that reflects the approach to me. This idea of what do Māori think, and that Māori means normal, and that's a post-contact term, that we are Māori. We've got Te Whare Tapu o Ngāpuhi here, and the Te Puku o Te Ika, and there is a difference there, just like our ngahere. He's got kauri, I've got kahikatea, So when it comes to how do we interact with Te Tiriti, how do we interact with Māori? And the answer is it depends, and it depends where you are. Because if you go down south to Kaitahu, what they want from their settlements and all of that, I can't speak on that because I'm not from there, nor can one document which I think was signed in 8 locations for the entirety of the South Island. I don't think that can also speak on it. It's playing that long game and that long-term vision again, instead of just saying, we've gone out for consultation, we've signed the treaty, bang. It's building that rapport for Kaitahu, and then when we go up to Ngāpuhi, we don't just do the same thing because it worked on the other side of the country.
I reckon it's like the canned tomatoes food drive fallacy. It's like everyone gives the canned tomatoes because they think that's what they want. But and it's the same goes for businesses. It's like, if you really want to do what's right, you have to actually ask what people want. And you don't just give canned tomatoes. Because if you go to like the shelters and ask what they want, they won't tell you it's canned tomatoes. Sure, that's the cheapest and most easiest thing to turn up to the can drive with, but that's not the answer. And sometimes though, it's going to take a long time for organisations to build relationships with iwi, to build relationships with NGOs that actually mean that you can get those answers of what they want. You're not just going to be able to send an email and be like, sweet, how can we help today? And that's going to take a real big shift in the way we work, because that's not how the Pākehā system always works. Relationships must be formed before we can get these answers.
We've talked a little bit about connecting to our native forests, and we've spoken before about how for some of us that's a little bit easier than for others. So some people living in their urban environment may never have seen a tui, as you just said. Like, how do we increase that connection for those people that don't have the same accessibility as others? How do we get them more involved? How do we bring them along with us?
Connecting kids with planting initiatives where they get out and they get on farms and they plant, or they get out and see the forest. And like Taylor can talk about this as well, like education is a cool as way to show kids the natural world, and which is really important.
Or even if just like as the bare minimum, like I used to live around heaps of farmland, but a subdivision has started sprawling around my area, and just like bare minimum, they're planting pūtakawas down every street, and there's tuis everywhere. It's awesome, but yeah, even just that as a bare minimum in urban environments.
Completely tautoko that. I think it's not just about providing access to the forests that already exist, but creating access for people to be involved in afforestation and in planting, but also then in having ngahere where people are so that they don't have to go to it. But then, as well as that, providing transport options and accessibility that meets a range of kind of needs, and also kind of low carbon options as well. So ensuring that we have, cycleway, walkway, bridleway networks that do connect up our parks, our forests, our ngahere, and that provide a real interconnected way of accessing all of these things. And I think, again, it comes back to that whole notion of just breaking down kind of the silos or the bounds that we see different bits of whenua being, and kind of opening up how people are able to connect to it. And I think, as we're moving into this kind of era where, addressing the climate crisis transformationally needs to be top of mind, those low carbon options to get around our local communities and to access the ngahere is really important.
I think, so many of these issues are intersectional, whether it's transport, whether it's equitability for housing, for example. We're building, we don't have enough houses here in Aotearoa. We're building huge suburban sprawl. But if we were to build medium density housing with mosaic forests in between, that would have significant benefits to the people, to the landscape, to the climate, to transport. All these issues are intersectional, and I think we really need to start viewing, we talked about, we had yesterday, this isn't a forestry issue, this is a climate issue. I think at the end of the day, if we peel it all back and if we say these are all issues, but they are all part of the same kind of social issues we have across the country that we're trying to solve. And we're not a forestry conference or a climate change conference, but we're a better world conference. We're trying to create a better place for everyone, and our forests and our wildlife, and we can't just be thinking in one place.
And I think you've touched on something that's really important. Everyone has, but it's that idea that all of these different things kind of stem from this massive disconnect, and addressing that requires, change to the way that we live, change to the way that we build, change to the way that we develop our systems. And part of that is, bringing these spaces, bringing forests to people rather than the other way around. For our young people, it's bringing green spaces into their schools. It's bringing green spaces into the areas around their schools. It's providing opportunities for them to get involved in planting programs, and I'm sure that can be spoken to more by some of the others, because I know that they've got lots of experience in that area. But it's about rebuilding those connections that have been lost, and you can't do that in any way except a really practical approach where you are bringing people directly into these environments. There is no substitute for that kind of real practical hands-on in-person experience. And I mean, I'm sure we've all felt, when you're in the forest, you are connected to it, and that, again, it's that idea of interconnectedness with our environment rather than seeing ourselves as separate. So rebuilding that as well is really critical to, bringing others along. So really supporting and encouraging and uplifting people to be able to access these experiences, to be able to have these experiences beyond, the bare minimum where they might go to, a grassy field, and that might be their experience with nature in their community because they don't have these spaces. So creating and building these spaces and these experiences.
And I think that's where I see a real opportunity with our taonga pūoro. And they've always been used for rongoa and to heal and to connect. And even if I just pick up this pūmotomoto here, this could be the first time someone's ever seen tōtara. And this could be the first time someone's ever seen the ngutu of a kāka. And this is such a tangible way for someone to connect with the ngahere. And that I can just put our pūoro in the bag and just sort of cruise around and bring those spaces to people. And then if they're played as well, that's another form of connection. And that might plant the seed for someone to start thinking, I've actually never seen a tōtara before. Why is that? And how do I get my hands on some more?
What does being kaitiaki of our native forests actually look like?
I think we kind of discussed how this is different for everyone. Everyone has a different kind of role to play. So I know that there's a lot of people that want to get involved with pest control groups. Maybe they volunteer on the weekend to do like trapping, baiting, or they plant, or they are doing releasing of their trees. Like, it's different for everyone, and it's different based on what area you're in, but we can all have a positive impact.
Another Te Aroha disclaimer. My cousin Tamir Malcolm wrote a beautiful article about this, where we hear the word kaitiaki, and we hear the word kaitiakitanga come out a lot. But for us, kaitiaki's never been a human term. So kia ora e kare. So kaitiaki, we see other tuakana. So that is your ngahere, your taniwha, your manu, your ngarara, te mea. And they protect us. We don't claim that term. However, we are tangata tiaki, and that tiaki, that to care for, that is the root of it. And so I think this is the same thing where it's like, what does te tiriti do? It depends. So when I think about as playing a role as a tangata tiaki, it comes back to that first kōrero we had where what can you physically do? Because if we try and do everything, you're just going to burn out. And that holistic well-being approach as well, because at the end of the day, you shouldn't kill yourself trying to save our forests because you can't do it on your own. But no one's asking you to do it on your own. So looking at what resources we have and who we can connect in with what, whether that be education, whether it be out there planting the trees, whether it's sitting at the table in the crown fighting for it, all of those are a way to be a kaitiaki, instead of it just being, it's the guy out in the bush who can name 20 different kinds of birds.
That idea of community as well. How are we centering our communities around our ngahere? How are we building spaces for people to come together, building communities where people can access, information and education from those who know more, and how are we supporting those spaces if we have the power and the ability to do so? And it all contributes to that idea of being tangata tiaki, as you've said, of really caring for the whenua, yes, but also for each other. And that idea of bringing people together rather than being siloed, as has been discussed earlier, rather than being siloed into these separate areas. How can we come together? How can we learn from one another and build on that to better care for our forests, for our people, and for our planet as a whole?
And what we need is more greenwashing and talking and no action.
I just want to quickly reiterate my last point again here is that, if we're whatever your role as tangata tiaki is, I suppose it's thinking about more broadly about, those discussions we had yesterday about kaitiakitanga, and it's not just about the tipu, the whenua, it's also about the tangata. And so, there are communities across the country where you could go and host a planting day and no one would turn up because they're all busy just putting food on their plate. So, firstly, there's a role there for, some tangata tiaki to be out planting trees and out be doing that mahi. But in terms of if we want our forest to thrive, we also have to protect our people so that they can then go out and protect the forest as well.
When we've spoken over the last few weeks, you all sort of said to me that one of the most important you wanted to have the chance to get a kind of key takeaway or a message or a call to action across to this audience, and knowing that we've also got young people watching us online from schools. So I want to give you that opportunity, because we've also got a lot of questions that have come through the audience. I'm trying to read this as we go, but this is your chance to kind of say your last kind of call to action statement, like what you'd like these people in the room to all hear. So feel free to kick that off.
Does anyone want to kick things off? Otherwise, I'm happy to. Go for it. Great. I guess I really want to stress the importance of that interconnected approach of understanding ourselves as a part of the environment, but also of understanding that our responsibility and our obligations to care for that environment differ depending on our ability to do so. To remind you to look at your own power, to look at your privilege within these spaces, and to really examine how you can use that to, extend that to others, to bring others along with you who may not have the same power, the same privilege, the same capacity as you to make change. How you can build communities and how you can really strengthen action in a forestry space, yes, but also in a wider environmental sense. How you can ensure that your actions are uplifting people and in doing so uplifting our planet. Young people walking into these spaces, it's really challenging because we are walking into a space where we know that our futures, the futures of our children, the futures of our grandchildren are determined by your actions here and now. As Sophie said, we're in this golden window where we need to take action urgently, and we've got the chance to turn around some of these crises we're facing. Climate change, the biodiversity crisis. We need action on these now, and we need you to be really examining what you're doing and what you could be doing better and what you could be doing more of.
So good.
Kind of just going off that, I just want to say that whatever your focus is, whatever your passion is, whether that's biodiversity, strengthening biodiversity, looking after your waterways, allowing your farmland to be productive, it's all related. Like planting our native trees, our forests, they have so many benefits. So whatever your focus is, we're all working towards the same thing. And just think of your kids, think of the younger generations that you're leaving this legacy to.
Just building on from that too, I would love for this to be an intergenerational approach where hopefully those of you in the room don't feel like we're going, you need to do more, you need to do more, you need to do this, you need to do that. I think, again, it's about recognising the power of our collectivity and the different perspectives and expertise that we bring based on our lived experience, based on who we are, our identities, our intersectional identities. And so I see that as being pretty important. In terms of the climate space, I think if we think about kind of sequestration and reduction in actual emissions over this side, I'd love for us to just be going like this, and just finding that sweet spot, but doing both as quickly and as meaningfully as we can, as transformationally as we can. But I don't think we can afford to do one a whole lot, not do the other. We need to be kind of bringing in both of those edges and, again, finding that point in the middle, because our next generation very much does rely on it. I would come back to too the importance of public and political commitment to protecting our ngahere and to regenerating our ngahere. That is something that each of us in the room as individuals can be a part of creating, can be a part of sharing and spreading and bringing more people on board with as well. Because if we kind of create this massive momentum in the direction that we want to be heading, I think there's so much power in that, and kind of coming together around what are those common goals, as has been mentioned by just about everyone, is going to be, I think, really, really important, and those co-benefits. So to finish, kind of my challenge to you would be to think about what hope looks like, what kind of ancestor you want to be, and how that practically looks. And how you can kind of bring on board more young people into the mahi that you're doing who might help to instill that thought every step of the way. Kia ora.
Sorry, I'd like to add on to it as well. It's because I think I don't want to use the word normalizing almost this hope and climate stuff, because obviously being in this big conference full of people that share this passion, it's easy to forget that a lot of young people just don't care or think about it. I know people that have convinced themselves that they don't have to do anything because it's only rising by one degree every few years. It's nothing much. It's fine. I'm gonna die long before it happens. So a lot of people just don't know / just aren't bothered to learn / just don't care. So Like, you laugh, but it's a lot of people. Like, you'd be surprised.
Oh no, we know.
Yeah. A lot of people. So it's just, just have to keep spreading that. Or maybe like change the way, bring awareness to it. Because a lot of people are kind of turned off or turned away by the, let's be green. Like, obviously, like, that's what it is. It's good. Like, let's do that. But a lot of people don't connect with that. I'm not sure. Just spreading awareness more. Just different ways, connecting to different groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, I just like to kōrero to the young people watching as well. I mean, I quite regularly get asked why I'm so passionate, and I think like I'm not necessarily any more passionate than any of these young people, but I think I was protected and facilitated, and I was allowed to continue to grow this passion for our ngahere and to enter this space, and I feel very, very privileged and very lucky for that. So, you know, I want you all to think about how you can, to all those young people watching, but all those young people generally across Aotearoa, how you can protect them, how you can facilitate them to maintain that passion, how you can get them to come up into this space and contribute to the world that they're going to inherit from you. But also a warning in that, you know, there'll be students on this Zoom call watching now who will have better plant identification skills than you, because the young people coming through have access to technology that you can't imagine. They have skills to research that are beyond your comprehension. And if you don't bring them on board, if you don't help them to help, generally, they will take over and they will take your job. So, you know, help them or get out of the way.
Ki au nei, ko te mea nui, me haere koutou ki te ngahere. Ki reira, me āta whakarongo, me āta rongo hoki koutou ki te wairua, ki te āhua o te ngahere, me nā e kore, me wānanga. So I think for me, just go to the forest. We get so caught up in our laptops, we get so caught up in our meetings and our Skypes and our Zooms and our Teams and go to the forest. And just think carefully about why you do what you do, and you'll feel it. And if you don't feel it there, then that's probably a sign that we should do something. And I think the manu are such a tangible example because there's something that can be heard, they can be seen, they can be identified, but it is a feeling, and that feeling is why we do what we do. You can't write it down, you can't explain it, and I know there's been attempts to quantify the value of forest in a non-timber way. You'll never be able to quantify it because it's non-quantifiable, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And it's so easy to get lost in your meetings, lost in the constant whawhai, that you just sometimes need to go and take a breather and just go to the forest. So just after this, or wherever you can, go to your forest, wherever that looks like. And that feeling you'll feel will help you realign why you do what you do. And if you can't feel something, then maybe we should do something about it.
So I think we've got time for a couple of questions. There's a lot of questions here. I think it's probably the most that any group has been asked. So let's go for some of them. We've kind of touched on this, but one of the questions is there a divide with large groups of urban youth disengaged with climate change and forestry and nature matters? And is this a serious issue in these times?
Yes.
I don't know if it's necessarily a rural-urban divide, as it is a place-to-place resources socioeconomic divide. Because I think, like, you know, if you were here in, you know, Wellington, you have a lot of nature in the city. You're phenomenally lucky. But there are parts of Aotearoa that don't have a lot of nature, and they don't have a lot of resources to engage with that nature. So I do think it's not necessarily a rural-urban as much as it is place by place, socioeconomics, and access and equity.
And it's that loss of knowledge as well. I know a lot of people here will be like, why is there this parrot on my deck? It's annoying. But not understanding, not only if you look at a kaka, they weren't here not that long ago. And then you put the cultural lens on and you understand how tapu that manu is and always will be to us. But it's just a parrot, and in a similar vein, that's just a tree. No, that's akahikatea. And we've just completely lost that. So even if we're surrounded by it, we don't know what we're looking at. And that's where the role of education and building that fire again for people to understand why it's important to have that parrot on your deck.
Let's teach them, and let's teach them practically. Let's get them out there and so they understand properly.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that there's massive energy and appetite to change from young people, massive appetite for change. We saw that 170,000 people out on the streets standing united for climate justice. A part of that is obviously ensuring that we have incredible, flourishing, thriving biodiversity in Ngāhere. And so I think that, yeah, if that's not a mandate, what is? And I think that the really tricky thing is figuring out how we do create that kind of universal intergenerational mandate for action. And I think a challenge in that too is that if the conversation to people who don't know a whole lot about the topics that we're having kōrero about, and you've been having kōrero about over the last 2 days, if the conversation's presented in a way that naturally invites division, it's really hard for someone to come in and try and engage with it when they just feel like they don't know where they'll ever stand, when actually all they want is to ensure thriving biodiversity. And so how can we actually create this kind of mandate around the outcomes, and then again figuring out how different actions and the roles of different people fit within that. But far out, there's a mandate for change. I really think, and I don't think that's necessarily kind of split between our urban rangatahi and those who are out in the rural areas. I think there's just a mandate for change because there really needs to be. And I think it's time too that those in power, as kind of Rhiannon said, actually sit up and listen to the young people who don't have the opportunity to vote. You know, we can only vote when we're 18. What about lowering the voting age? Things like that are actually really practical steps that we could take to enable young people to bring their mandate into spaces of power and make the change that they want to make and I think know how to make.
And I think also at the same time with that rural-urban divide, it's like you can spend your whole life reading about how to ride a horse, but until you're actually in a paddock with one, you realise how you actually need to know how to do it and figure it out. No book reading can prepare you for that. It's like at the same time, you can spend days and days reading about biodiversity or identifying native rako and stuff like that, but until you're actually out in a forest or actually talking to forest people, you won't. That's only when you can really fully understand the gravity of it or how big it is. So yeah, it's getting out there.
And how we can make that education as accessible as possible with the clearest, simplest language so that we're not taking away from people's ability to engage with it.
This is a good one.
For everyone.
I've got one more question I've been allowed, I'm going to get in now. We kind of touched on it earlier as well, but if lots of people stood up when you asked the room to stand up if they engage with youth. What does genuine engagement in partnership with youth look like to you? And we touched on, you know, some of you have been here for 2 days, have had many conversations or not, like things like that.
Oh yeah, like during all the breaks and stuff, we were the ones trying to approach people and include ourselves and insert ourselves rather than people coming up to us, I suppose, which is a bare minimum. Yeah.
If there are young people in the room and you are not utilising them as, you know, someone to listen to, someone to hear from, someone to engage with beyond just a 1-hour panel, then you are not doing youth engagement well. A panel like this is a starting point. It is up to you to continue that beyond just this space. And if you have had young people here over the past 2 days and haven't had the chance or haven't prioritised engaging with them, then I really suggest you do that today, because all of the young people sitting alongside me are just such phenomenal leaders in their own fields and have such a wealth of knowledge beyond, you know, what is siloed in one area. And I think that's one of the things that's missing, is that this isn't the be-all and end-all of engagement is 6 young people sitting on a panel. It should be with your own specific community. It should be working to engage the young people who are not volunteering for these opportunities, because a lot of our young people don't feel comfortable operating in these spaces. And so it's removing that discomfort for them too, even if it is uncomfortable for you to do so.
Yeah, the same goes, we asked how many were under 30. So, the people here either don't have people at their organisations who are under 30 or they didn't bother to bring them. And both those are interesting questions that you might want to confront.
Great. I'm not actually going to rush into the next speaker because this panel deserves some hope. And people tend to use hope and optimism as synonyms, but that isn't accurate. Optimism is the belief that things will just turn out okay. And I don't think this panel has any optimism. But hope, I don't have any, I don't know about you, but hope is a conviction that you can act in a way to change things or make things better. And so this panel has given you lots of really clear ideas about how you could act in a way that would give them hope, how you could act in a way that would change things for them. So you've got no excuse not to do something different after listening to this panel. So I'm going to give you just a minute now to think to yourself, what is one thing that I'm going to do differently after I've heard this panel? And during that minute, Makati, do you want to play for us? Well, everyone has a minute just to connect with what you've heard just now and what's one thing that you're going to do different.
Whoa.
Thank you. Kia ora. Everybody, I cannot find the words to say how much I appreciate you all coming along, to sharing your thoughts, your vision, your hope, your optimism for the future, or not. And honestly, I feel very privileged that we've had the chance to speak to you today, as I'm sure everyone in the audience and everyone online does too. So again, thank you. Kia ora.